The Nightingales had made their fortune with quarries and lead mines. They lived in accordance with the principles of upper-class English society, though they were a modern, liberal family. The family lived in a large home in Derbyshire. Florence grew up there with her older sister, Parthenope. Both girls were named after the Italian cities they were born in. Their father, William Edward Nightingale, was a cultivated man. He passed on to his daughters a taste for fine things, literature, Greek and Latin. With no school for girls available, Florence turned to her father's library. She was an advanced child, reading Dickens and the poetry of Victor Hugo.
She had expansive interests across the arts, culture and science, and of course mathematics and statistics, in which she excelled. And she spoke 5 languages.
She discovered a passion for mathematics and would spend entire days locked in the library, despite her mother's concern at such diligence. Florence met eminent visitors in the family home, such as Charles Darwin or Dr. Samuel Gridley Howe, founder of the first schools for the blind in the United States, a man who encouraged her to pursue her scientific curiosity. After such an education, she was sure to make an excellent marriage.
So her father had high hopes for her, but there was nowhere for her to take her education. She was totally frustrated that her job as a Victorian young woman was to stay at home, to keep the house, to do the management accounts, to be the host for the potential husband, to look after the children, and effectively read books all day and sewing, which her sister did quite admirably, but she didn't want to do that.
Florence, who was interested in topical issues and social questions, had no desire for that sort of life. What's more, she was religious, and her faith made her strong. At the age of 16, she felt a calling to devote her life to the service of others.
God called me this morning and asked me would I do good for him alone and without reputation. He leads me down paths I do not yet know.
Nightingale experienced what she always called a call to service. Now, we don't know if she heard a voice, actually, but she called it that, and it was to serve.
Turning her back on the life that had been laid out for her, Florence found the courage to stand up for a radical choice. At the age of 25, she told her parents she wanted to become a nurse.
She understood that to become a nurse, she would like to have worked at the local hospital. And indeed, there was a senior doctor who was a family friend who would have looked after her and made it, respectable, as it were. But that wasn't good enough for the family.
At the time, hospitals were for the poor and needy. Florence's parents were horrified at the thought she would frequent this sort of place and pursue work that was inappropriate for a woman of her social standing.
The first idea I can recollect when I was a child was a desire to nurse the sick. My daydreams were all of hospitals, and I visited them whenever I could. I never communicated it to anyone. I would have been laughed at, but I thought God had called me to serve him in that way.
She used to escort her female family members to go and look after the people in the poorhouses. And she realised then that that's what she wanted. But every time she asked her parents whether she could do this, they totally refused.
She had that, and not just from her mother, from everybody in the family, her sister particularly. But I think she understood it. I mean, she certainly didn't like it, but she understood it, that this was just a very disreputable thing to do.
To get her to renounce her whimsical project, Florence's parents sent her on a trip, chaperoned by a couple who were family friends. Egypt, Greece, Italy, France, everything to make her change her mind. Curiously, the journey ended far from the beaten tourist path, on the banks of the Rhine, a few kilometers from Düsseldorf.
A few years ago, I had obtained a report of Kaiserswerth. Since then, I had always been wishing to go there, and sometimes when the opportunity was in my very hand, it was taken from me. My sister declared I never should, but the way was opened for me by a curious chain of circumstances.
The detour to Kaiserswerth was not part of the plan. Her parents would have disapproved. But Florence insisted to her chaperones on spending a few days there with one idea in mind: meeting Theodor Fliedner. The reputation of this Lutheran minister with innovative methods had reached all the way to England. Heading a very poor parish, he founded the Order of Deaconesses to allow women to work in his social institution. He founded orphanages and nursery centres, and a hospital school that took in the sick and poor.
Und wahrscheinlich war diese Verbindung von sozialem Engagement.
It was the connection between social work and Christian faith that made Florence Nightingale want to come here, to Kaiserswerth. Because the work Fliedner was doing was completely new and revolutionary.
Man könnte was sagen, revolutionär. Weil in der sehr hierarchischen
In the extreme social hierarchy of 19th century Germany,
aber sie sollten nicht
there was no question of a woman working outside of the home, in nursing or education, and even less getting involved in the social life of the country. Women had no political role.
Politische Abstinenz eine Rolle.
For Florence, seeing these women at work was a liberating revelation. The deaconesses confirmed her idea that she could do something useful, in complete harmony with her calling.
Fliedner als Gemeindepfarrer.
As a minister, Fliedner considered himself a missionary. Everything he did was founded on faith. For him, the combination of proselytism and social action was fundamental. And this vision that aimed to make society more Christian was essential for Florence Nightingale.
Theodor Fliedner's innovative ideas crossed borders. Deaconess houses opened as far away as the Middle East. Florence convinced her parents to let her return to Kaiserswerth in 1851. She would stay there 3 months. Finally, she would be able to get started.
And Nightingale reports preparations for death, learning how to lay out a body, and she spent time in the apothecary. And you get her notes as to what drugs she learned to prepare there. It was doing important work, and she wanted to work. So it was a great time for her. But in Kaiserswerth, she was thrown into the wards without any supervision, not the way to do it, never talked to the doctor. Nurses didn't talk to the doctor back then. She saw women, deaconesses, doing useful work, but it wasn't trained nursing work.
So I think all of those ideas crystallized and fed into her vision of nursing, which was built on, what we would now call quality improvement, and reforming the character of nurses as a means of improving the quality of care and the people who came into the profession.
After her months among the deaconesses, Florence returned to London. The experiences she'd had during her travels helped her realize what was essential: discipline, medication, the importance of empathy. She was convinced of her calling and renounced the upper-class lifestyle her mother had planned for her.
I hated the idea of being tied forever to a life of society, and only such a marriage could I have. I myself was tempted after several years of resistance. I had never given up the idea of reaching at last a better life than the one laid out for me. I think it was God who saved me from the altar.
She had several suitors, but she would reject them all. Miss Nightingale wanted to work.
When she actually was asked in 1853 to become the superintendent of this small hospital for gentlewomen during illness, very small hospital in Upper Harley Street. She took it. It was her way in. It was the foot in the door. It wasn't where she wanted to be. She would have been in a big, noisy hospital with desperately sick people rather than there. But that was, her family would allow that. And by then she was 33. You know, this is a very long wait.
With the post of superintendent at the Institute for the Care of Sick Gentlewomen in Upper Harley Street, Florence imposed her rigor, cleaned up the accounting, and changed the way nursing was practiced. She loved maths and ran statistics on the sanitary conditions at the Institute. No doctor had ever done that before. This is when a letter from the young Minister of War interrupted her course.
I must not conceal from you that I think upon your decision will depend the ultimate success or the failure of the plan. Your own personal qualities, your knowledge and your power of administration, and among greater things your rank and position in society, give you advantage in such a work which no other person possesses.
And then Elizabeth Herbert, Sidney Herbert's wife, who understood that Nightingale had experienced a call to service, which meant really a call to save lives. Elizabeth Herbert said, "This is your chance. This is it." And Nightingale never hesitated at all. She'd been waiting for this.
That moment determined Florence Nightingale's fate. When the history of the British Empire intersected with a young woman's calling to devote herself to others. She spent nearly 2 years near the front lines, visiting every field hospital and sending daily reports back to England. In just a few months, she drastically lowered the mortality rate at Scutari Hospital. March the 30th, 1856, the Treaty of Paris brought an end to the Crimean War. The British had lost 20,000 men, the French nearly 100,000. Epidemics were 4 times more lethal than the battles, a failure of military medicine that Miss Nightingale would bear witness to.
Dear Mrs. Hunt, I regret I must inform you that your son passed away in the hospital last Sunday. He suffered from chronic dysentery and grew weaker and weaker. He left without too much suffering. We did everything we could to keep his strength up until the end. The chaplain and myself were at his side every day.
I think it made a profound impact on her psychologically, physically, and the rest of her life's work. The imprint that it left was traumatic, I think, and very profound, but a huge motivator at the same time, because she had the most incredible capacity for hard work.
Summer 1856. It was time for the nurses to return to England. Hygiene, disinfection, empathy. Miss Nightingale planted seeds here that would change the face of hospitals in the years to come. She trained the first modern nurses.
The peace treaty was signed. That meant everybody who was healthy could go back as soon as there was a ship to take them. But there were still men in the hospitals, and she did not go back until the last patient left the hospital.
When she left Constantinople, Florence was no doubt one of the most well-known women in Great Britain. The fame made her uncomfortable, especially after being so shaken by her experience in Scutari.
I think it fired her imagination in ways that would have been unimaginable. It fired her motivation to come back and reform the British military health of soldiers and hospitals. And then, you know, transferring those lessons to civilian life and civilian hospitals.
After 22 months in the midst of chaos, Florence returned home as discreetly as possible, under her mother's name, as Miss Smith. While England was celebrating victory, she was reunited with her loved ones, far from the cheering crowds, in the large house at Lea Hurst.
Nightingale did not want to go back as the famous Miss Nightingale. She wanted to work and save lives, and I think she didn't want distractions. This was a matter of faith for her. She was following a mission. You don't follow a mission to get personal gain. You follow a mission to achieve the goals of the mission, which are to save lives and to make things better, to prevent the same kinds of things happening in the future. She wanted to get on with that.
For the mission she'd chosen, Florence would find an unhoped-for ally. In September 1856, she was invited to Balmoral Castle in Scotland, the summer residence of Queen Victoria.
Dear Miss Nightingale, you are, I know, well aware of the high sense I entertain of the Christian devotion which you have displayed during this great and bloody war. And I need hardly to repeat to you how warm my admiration is for your services, which are fully equal to those of my dear and brave soldiers, whose suffering you have had the privilege of alleviating in so merciful a manner. From Balmoral Castle, Queen Victoria.
Who knows how those kinds of invitations are made and what lies behind the sort of political kind of motivation, but certainly to have patronage from the Queen and Prince Albert was incredibly helpful. And I think it sounds as if they struck up a very positive relationship. Queen Victoria was a woman of guts and courage as well, and I think they probably saw that in each other.
The tacit alliance formed with the Queen was a stroke of luck for Florence Nightingale. On the advice of her friend Sidney Herbert, she suggested the creation of a royal commission to examine the situation of military hospitals. Several senior officers and politicians were hostile to it. Yet Queen Victoria agreed to an investigation on one condition, that Florence write the preliminary report. It fell to Lord Penmuir, fierce opponent of the project, to make the official request. To a woman, a major first.
Miss Nightingale, 18th of February, 1857. Madam, knowing your devotion to improving the living conditions of our soldiers, I dare ask for your help and additional advice Your experience and personal observations have no doubt provided you with important information concerning the treatment of the sick and wounded, as well as the sanitary needs of the army. It is in this perspective that I am honored today to ask you the favor of sharing the fruits of this experience. It goes without saying that should you accept, they will be considered with utmost consideration. Conclude with, I have the honor of being your faithful servant, Lord Penmuir, Minister of War. That will be all, thank you.
Like Lord Penmuir, ministers and military figures could not get over the concept of dealing with a nurse. But Miss Nightingale was now much more than a nurse. With this report, she would become a well-known and respected public figure in England.
Nightingale really wasn't interested initially she had no notion of reforming. Her life was a desire to make a practical difference to ordinary people.
Driven by her desire to minister to the greatest number, Florence would profoundly transform her country's policies of public health, and the ideas of reform she brought to England would soon cross borders.